Hey everyone. Today I want to talk about the language around describing people. Now, as you know, if you're learning English, we have a lot of words. All those lots of words have different connotations. Connotations is like a feeling that goes along with it, like a positive feeling, a negative feeling, right? And so you can imagine when we're describing people that sometimes the words that we choose to describe them can even be offensive, okay? And I just thought this was important to talk about because we all make mistakes. We all unintentionally might offend people, okay? That's because we can never know what it's like to be everyone, right? But what's important is to learn when somebody tells us, hey, I don't like that word, can you use this word instead? Or maybe they won't tell you, but you've heard somewhere that this is an outdated word, or that word doesn't work anymore because it's offensive, or historically it has a relationship to something in the past, it's really hurtful. So we want to pay attention to that, and I want to talk about that in this video just so that you're aware of the words that have evolved, right, into what we're using now to describe people. And hey, as you know, language evolves, language changes all the time. The English I'm speaking right here, right now, is not the English that just we were using, that was being used hundreds of years ago. No way, okay? I might not have even been understood, okay? But what I'm saying is that words evolve, language evolves, and we just want to keep up with it, right? Because we want to be current, but we also want to be able to show that we're human, right? By not hurting somebody with our words. And you might not think you're hurting somebody with the words you're choosing to describe them, but if somebody tells you that you are, I think it's a good idea to listen to them, right? Because it's hard for us to know if we don't feel that. For example, for me, as a white woman who looks and dresses like what most people would expect a woman to look like. I'm cisgender, which we'll talk about later. I'm a native speaker of English. I don't have a disability. So people don't constantly use words to describe me that are outdated, okay, or that are hurtful. So I don't actually know what that feels like, but I can appreciate when somebody tells me that a word is offensive. And I have used words like that in my past, right? In the past. And I want to learn because I don't want to hurt people with the words that I choose, okay? So I know that this sounds like political correctness or a political post, but I want to say it's not. This is a language channel. We're talking about language and the languages we use and the words we choose. We're talking about connecting. We're talking about communication. When we talk to people, we are communicating ideas, okay? And we can communicate things without knowing it, okay? Based off the words we use, okay? That's why I thought that this was important. I just want to talk about this. I see a lot in my students writing words that are just outdated or just hurtful, and I think that there's better ways to write, okay? So let's talk about that. So first, let's just talk grammar a little bit. A noun is a person, place, thing, or idea, okay? And an adjective is a word that describes a noun. So I can have a marker, that's a noun, person, place, thing, idea, and I can describe this marker. It's blue, a blue marker. I have an adjective and a noun there. When we want to describe people, specifically people that have been sort of like unincluded historically, right? Sometimes we'll say, they'll turn an adjective into a noun. Okay, so like they'll say, okay, look, I have markers here, okay? I have all these markers. They're markers, okay? They're markers. There's a blue marker, a green marker, black markers, okay? But when you start saying the blues, greens, a green, the blacks, what we're doing there is we're turning that adjective, the color, into the noun, a noun. We're making the description of the person not a description, and instead like who that person is. We're not describing it anymore. We're identifying what it is. We're making that thing its description rather than what it is. And these are markers. I mean, they're colorful markers, but they're markers, right? Like, I am a person. I'm not a white. I'm a white person. So let's say these are people. Let's say they're people. These are their races. Let's just say, okay? So we have the blue person, the green person, the black people, okay? So we can say, oh, the green likes this or that. The blue does that. The blacks go over there, right? Okay, it makes it feel like we're not talking about them being the same thing. They're all markers. But when we say the blue markers like to do this, and the green marker likes to do that, and the black markers like to do this, there's a unifying word there, and that is that they're all markers, okay? Add to that let's imagine then that the black markers have historically been denied being part of a group, right? Because of laws from the past or discrimination or slavery and things like that, okay? Or even it happening now. Then it becomes even more hurtful over the course of someone's life to hear this description of them. It's just easy. Just instead of saying, turning somebody's race, okay, or even nationality into a noun, keep it as an adjective and add the word people afterwards, okay? So instead of saying the blacks, okay, instead of saying that, you're gonna say the black people. Instead of saying a Chinese, you would say a Chinese person, okay? Instead of saying whites, right? You're gonna say white people, okay? Now I do want to talk a little bit about, and you've probably have learned this studying nouns and things like that, that a lot of the time in English we will use the plus an adjective. We will turn an adjective into a noun to describe a group of people. Like we'll say the Chinese or the Japanese or the Dutch or the rich, the poor. We do this in English, okay? And it is grammatical, but what I'm saying is that even though it's grammatical, when we're talking about describing people who have been historically pushed away, we make them feel more pushed away by not adding that word people to it, okay? All right, so before I move on, I want to talk about the word Black and African American. I mentioned that earlier. I used them both. As of now, what I know, what I've learned, what I've heard is that you can use Black or African American when we're talking about Americans, right, that have African descent. Then you use African American. But sometimes people do not want to be referred to as African American, or they don't identify as that, and instead identify as Black because they might not know their lineage back to Africa because of the ugly history that we have with slavery, where instead of referring to themselves as African American, they will refer to them as Black, which is an empowering word for them. Okay, now if you talk to someone and you say Black or African American, and then they tell you, hey, I prefer that you use this word instead, then use the word that they prefer. Great that they told you, right? Same thing when we're talking about when we're grouping people. So like when we say Asians, okay, remember it's Asian, we want to try to say Asian people, okay? But if you actually know what part of Asia they're connected to, then it would be great if you could say that place too, like Japanese or Chinese or Vietnamese, right? If you don't know, you don't know, okay? Definitely don't assume you know if you don't know, okay? A lot of people do that. Also, in the United States, you don't want to call someone like Korean if they were born and raised here. They are Korean American. They are American, right? Korean American, or whatever it is that they prefer for you to describe them as, okay? And we also have indigenous groups in the United States. So you could say indigenous people, but if you actually know the tribe, like Navajo or Choctaw, you could use that one to be descriptive. So also when we're talking about people with Latin American connections, Latin America is Central South America, the Caribbean, A lot of times people will say Latino for men, Latina for women. A new term is Latinx. Latinx takes away the or the O at the end and just makes it for everybody, okay? But obviously if you know the connection, right, with where, in Latin America, that person's connected to, you would want to be specific, right? So like if you know they're Guatemalan, you say Guatemalan. If they're American, but they have Guatemalan connection, you can say Guatemalan American, right? So just the more specific you are, the more inclusive and the more that you're not just generalizing and clumping them into this big clump, okay? All right, you may have seen these acronyms before. These are being used widely. Acronym are just letters that represent words, right? So BIPOC or BIPOC, I've heard people say, or AAPI. I see these acronyms all the time. And so what they are is they stand for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. Then we also have AAPI, okay, and that is Asian American Pacific Islander. Okay, those are just so you know what those mean if you see them. I want to talk also about the word Spanish. Okay, so I hear in the United States, Spanish sometimes have different meanings depending on where you're at in the United States. When I hear the word Spanish, I think of people from Spain. Technically, Spanish means people from Spain. Spanish is also a language. So when people say Spanish person, but they're talking about someone from Latin America, it's not right. It's not technically right? It's not accurate. So you want to be careful with that. Although I know on the East Coast, like the Northwest, they use Spanish regularly to describe people who speak Spanish that may not be from Spain. Okay. So yeah, so just because someone speaks Spanish doesn't mean they're from Spain, right? Just because someone speaks English doesn't mean they're from England. Okay. I speak English. I'm not from England. A lot of times people will call me English because they're just learning the language and they still, they know I'm American, but they're working out the words to describe. Okay, so just be careful. An English person is not a person who speaks English. An English person is a person from England. An English speaker is a person who speaks English, and that could be anyone, anywhere in the world. Okay, a Spanish person is a person from Spain. A Spanish speaker is a person who speaks Spanish. Okay. And then there's all kinds of other words to describe. So, and this happens a lot with a lot of words. Also, we can't forget that we do have a lot of people that are multiracial. The word multiracial, I think, is an important word to add to your vocabulary. Some people don't like the word mixed or mixed race, but some people do. So multiracial just means multiple races. Obviously, if you know what races they are, you can say what they are, right? You can name them, okay? Of course, unless they don't want you to, right? But a lot of times we don't just have people who are one race. We have a lot of multiracial people living in the world. So when we're talking about people with disabilities, remember this video is about using language to describe people who may not be part of the dominant culture that's reflected in what we see and hear, right? And so we want to be careful with the words that we use to describe people so that they feel included, okay? So when we're talking about people with disabilities, we always want to put the person over the adjective. So this time, instead of putting the adjective before the noun, what we're doing is we're saying person with, and then you give an adjective, a description, or something like that. Okay, so instead of saying the deaf or the blind, right? You can say person who is deaf, a person who is blind, okay? Because you want to emphasize that they're a person before their disability that they have. Remember, we want our descriptions to describe a person and not define a person, okay? Homelessness. Homelessness, when we describe people who are living or experiencing homelessness, or you can say housing insecurity, that, we got to be careful, right? So, because it's a temporary experience, we hope, or they hope, right? And that it's something that doesn't just define them permanently, okay? So, we can, instead of saying a homeless person, we could say a person who is experiencing homelessness right now. Or we could say a person who is experiencing housing insecurity, or you could say something like that. I know it's really hard to change the way that you've been speaking for a long time. I admit it's very hard for me as well. You can acknowledge, oh gosh, yeah, I meant to use this word. Your language is automatic. Once it's in there, it's automatic. It just comes out, right? But sometimes we have to change the words if we want to change those words, if we want to, be current and humanizing. And then we have, when we're talking about gender and sexuality, gender expression, gender identity, and sex, and things like that. Okay, gender is something that people have come up with, this like social construct. Sex is, at least from where I see it, and whatever, sex is what you were born with. Whether you're got male sex organs or female sex organs, or maybe you're intersex, right? But gender is more so like something that we created, right? Like pink represents girls or something, right? So even though it doesn't have to, right? But like your gender identity is like how you identify, and your gender identity might not match the sex organs you were born with, right? And then you have your expression and the way you express yourself, the way you dress, the way you look, okay? So like my gender expression is that of a female, okay? That's obvious, but some people, it's not obvious, okay? And so when it's not obvious, you don't want to assume that that person is a man or woman, right? And even using pronouns like he or she can hurt them. And you totally might not understand that. When somebody tells you, oh, I don't use that pronoun he or she, I use the pronoun they or something else, try to use it. I know that's so hard. I know. It's language. Language is hard to change when it's already automatic inside of you, but you can make an effort. And if you mess up, just say, oh, I'm sorry. I misgendered you. I know you told me your pronoun. Or you can even ask somebody what their pronoun is if it's not clear to you what their gender expression is, okay? So, but what I want to say is that the words around describing people, the LGBTQ community, okay, we want to say gay, okay? Gay is not, it can be an offensive word when you say like, oh, you use it as an adjective only, okay? Like that person's gay. That's not right. Okay, you don't just, remember, we don't just use the adjective. We use an adjective plus a noun, gay person, okay? And gay can be used for men and women, although some women might prefer to be called lesbian people, okay? So lesbian is for women that are attracted to other women, and gay can be men who are attracted to other men, or women that are attracted to other women. And then we have the word queer. Queer used to be a word that was not good. It wasn't a word that was hurtful, okay? But it's coming back, and it's a word that is used to describe people who just don't fit into that like male, female, like binary, okay? Or anything, like even they don't fit into gay either, right? So they're queer, and queer is a word. It's an umbrella term, like to describe a lot of people who just don't fit into the male, female. But people might not like that word. Still, there's people that don't like that word. So if they tell you they don't like it, just don't use it, okay? Obviously, I missed a lot of things. I probably didn't, I know I didn't talk about everything, and I know I'm not an expert on this, but these are the things that I see in my students' writing that I think are important to try to avoid, okay? So words you don't want to use are totally outdated, are Oriental, okay? Colored. These words have historical associations with like laws and legislation and just like all kinds of bad things in the past. Okay, so we don't use those words. Homosexual, we don't use those words. It's very negative, derogatory associations. Transsexual, we don't say transsexual. We say transgender, or you call the person by what they want to be called, right? Or if it's gender expressions of woman, right? You just don't want to say transsexual, okay? There are a lot of other words that I'm not going to list here, but there are a lot of words that we don't use anymore, okay? So, but just the main thing is just know languages evolve. It's okay if you make a mistake. You just say, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, I didn't mean to hurt you. Okay, and you can learn new ways of describing people. All right, thanks for listening. Bye.